So today we have a good old-fashioned gaming news roundup where we're going to take a look at some new interviews with the developers of Virtua Fighter on how they plan to keep it as a unique standout fighter in a world where a lot of big fantastical fighters exist. We've also got some really big updates on the sales information for Resident Evil 4 Remake, which is pretty cool. We will also touch on the shutdown of Friday the 13th, a game I played a ton of. And we also got some teases for Sid in Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, which might give us an idea of what his playstyle is going to be like, what Rocket Town could look like, and also even Wutai in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe, and as always, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Alright, so it's been a while since I've done one of these old school kind of news roundups. It's pretty fun to do these every once in a while, kind of keep my brain fresh and not burned out on one specific thing. But we're going to go ahead and start off with that Virtua Fighter news. And Virtua Fighter has been making a pretty big comeback. Sega seems to be all in on supporting Virtua Fighter. They're going all out with esports, re-releases of old games. There's Virtua Fighter 5 Revo. There's the new VF that was announced at the Game Awards. Sega seems to have a lot of faith in bringing this franchise back, and I think a lot of people are super excited to see it come back. And how is it going to stand out in this day and age when we have super fantastical things like Tekken? We've got things like Street Fighter. The fighting game genre is super healthy. So what does VF do to stand out? And to answer that, we have a recent interview with one of the developers of the VF team, Masayoshi Yokoyama, who sat down recently with Famitsu. Now, this has been translated for us by Event Hubs, so we don't got to do any Google Translates, thankfully. But how does VF come back? Do they change a lot of things? Do they go the more fantastical route? Do they stick to their more martial arts focused identity? Yokoyama would go on to say that they are planning to keep Virtua Fighter tied to those straight-laced martial arts roots by comparing Virtua Fighter to the K1 Fighting League. Yokoyama goes on to say, K-1 was originally a straight-laced karate organization event started by Kazuyoshi Ishii. The K-1 fighters would use karate, kickboxing, or things that had been around for a long time, and there wasn't anything new. The entertainment of the matches was quite different from something like pro wrestling. There wasn't anything flashy, and it was a very plain fight. But by adding in the path and story which led the fighters to this point, it became top-level entertainment. That's why you can look at games that have a Hadouken or flashy special moves like a pro wrestling type of entertainment, while the entertainment that Virtua Fighter is aiming for would be closer to what K-1 was. So rather than change the rules or fill the screen with flashy things, we'd like to keep it plain and honest, and trying to enhance that side of it as its draw. From my perspective, that's what we have to do. So it's nice to know that to keep Virtua Fighter as a standout franchise from things like Tekken and Street Fighter, not only are they going to keep that back to basics martial arts gameplay, but they really want to focus a lot on the story and the characters and get you to care about them, so that way when you do have these fights and you play the game, you care even more. It's really, really brilliant. Which I think is also a really big factor in fighting games. It's not just what character looks cool and has a cool moveset. I think some people genuinely want to connect with a character and their identity and their story, and that's one of the reasons why they choose to pick a certain character as their fighting game main. And a lot of this actually stemmed from a leaked image from the new VF, which I won't put in here just because it's a leak and I don't like, covering leaks and all that stuff. But the UI for VF got leaked, and we had the standard health bar, and then there was a gauge underneath that health bar, which kind of got people wondering like, oh, what are they going to do with this gauge? Is it some sort of EX gauge? Is it like a super gauge? Is it like a stun gauge? So we still don't really quite know what it's going to be. I would probably bet on it being like something related to stunning and blocking and things like that. But it's really cool to see that Virtua Fighter is going to still stick to its roots. It's not going to try and compete with Tekken or Street Fighter by being super crazy and flashy. VF was always known for being that as close to possible martial arts fighting game. The combat of VF with people who know what they're doing is actually super fast paced, and watching the defensive nature of it is really entertaining. And when you compare it to things like Tekken, Tekken, even, the face of Tekken, Katsuhiro Harada, would admit that Tekken essentially ripped off Virtua Fighter for so many years, and you don't have a Tekken without Virtua Fighter. And Tekken, as weird as this is going to sound, did start off as very grounded, which I know is a weird statement to make because Tekken, since the beginning, has had fighting dinosaurs and kangaroos and bears and people that can turn into devils and angels. But as far as like the combat went, it was very much like a VF martial arts kind of fighter. But as Tekken progressed, it became way more fantastical. They had a much heavier emphasis on super moves and abilities, and now with Tekken 7 and Tekken 8, there's the rage arts and heat mode, and you're able to knock an enemy into the air and do some sort of crazy super that's really flashy. You've got people like Clive in Tekken 8, Noctis from Tekken 7, who were sword fighters who are now in a hand-to-hand fighting game. So Tekken has gotten really super fantastical over the years, very anime, I think some people would say, and VF obviously isn't going to do that. That's not VF's identity. Staying true to the martial arts, staying true to the, one-on-one offensive, defensive mechanics without being too flashy, I think is kind of what makes VF really flashy. Is when you've got people that know what they're doing playing VF, it's incredibly entertaining to watch and surprisingly fast-paced. So again, Virtua Fighter kind of sticking to what it does best, I think will help it stand out in a field where a lot of fighting games have gotten bigger and more, I don't know if bombastic is the type word here, but definitely much more extravagant and fantastical. And I definitely think there's a market of fighting game players who do want that. They want something that isn't super flashy, that is a little bit more old school, so to speak, or maybe not old school, but kind of stripped down and bare bones. And VF does that really well. So I'm super excited to see more on the next Virtua Fighter. I think it's going to be really awesome. Now up next we have some sales updates for Resident Evil 4 Remake, which was my personal game of the year that game came out. I thought it was wonderful, a really fantastic remake that also took liberties and kind of made it its own unique thing, changing up some of the story stuff, some of the combat and story encounters. All around fantastic game, great gameplay loop, great characters, action, the horror was done really well, and it sold pretty well when it first released. And as of last year in October of, I believe October 16th, which was my birthday, the game had sold 8 million units. And as of October 16th of 2024 to December 19th of 2024, they sold an extra 1 million units, now coming in at 9 million units sold total for that game, which is just insane. I think that makes it one of the higher selling Resident Evils out there. It's an incredibly popular franchise, but it really makes me very curious as, what do they do next with Resident Evil? We heard last year that they've already started work on the next mainline Resident Evil, and the devs were super excited about it, and they felt like they had found a new idea that got them excited for the next Resident Evil, which is super cool. And that's the thing I really appreciate about Capcom, is that they could have a winning formula, a game that sells really, really well, or a game that isn't really great like Resident Evil 6, but it sells well, but they'll still challenge themselves to come up with better gameplay stuff, better story stuff, to try and kind of reinvent the wheel a little bit for their next big game. And you look at RE6, they could have easily made RE7 in the same vein of RE6 because it sold so well, but they didn't. They themselves weren't crazy about how that game came out, so they're like, okay, we need to get back to basics here. How do we make Resident Evil scary and that survival horror game again that all people know and love? And we got Resident Evil 7 out of that, which really revitalized the franchise. And now that we're in the year of 2025, I would full on expect them to have something in regards to the next Resident Evil. Last year was flooded with so many rumors in regards to what the next game was going to be. It's going to be open world, it's going to star Leon, but no, it's going to have Chris. Maybe they'll bring back Jill. They're going to do this, and this. And it was just a bunch of weird rumors from random people hoping that if they threw enough stuff at the wall that maybe something would stick. But personally, again, I'd rather wait for Capcom to announce themselves what the next Resident Evil is going to be, and I think sometime soon they will do that. And Capcom usually has some pretty quick turnaround times when it comes to their games. The moment they announce them, usually it's going to come out within the next 6 months or so. So whatever Resident Evil 9 ends up being, I'm super excited. I can't wait to see what they're going to do, especially what fresh ideas do they bring to the table with RE9. How do they keep reinventing this franchise that is so beloved and usually really well done and high quality, and keep it moving forward while still keeping some of those same elements that we all know and love from things like RE4 Remake or even OG RE4, which completely redefined third-person shooters. Now up next, we are moving on to the Final Fantasy news, and this is cool because the Ever Crisis account on Twitter has officially teased the next main chapter of the Final Fantasy VII campaign that they have in Ever Crisis, and what do you know? It's gonna be Rocket Town, focusing on Cid. Now the reason why this stuff is cool is because while it is super faithful in terms of like how the art style is and how it looks to the original FF7, they do take inspirations from the remake trilogy when it comes to character designs and even redesigning some of the areas that we remember from the original game and giving them that remake glow up, so to speak. And in this trailer, we see a little bit of Rocket Town. We see that rocket that's just standing there in the middle of the town, not being used. We see the tiny Bronco, we see Cid, but more interestingly, we do see a brief snippet of combat from Cid. We see him doing a special ability. He goes up into the air, stabs his lance down into the ground, and this purple energy comes out. And that jump attack is probably his, Dragoon jump ability. Maybe it's like the Limit Break version in Ever Crisis, so it's probably something like that. Now, the purple energy thing could just be an Ever Crisis thing, but I love this because it at least gives us a hint at what Cid could do mechanically in 7 Remake Part 3. And I'm more interested in what Cid's gonna do because I think we kind of now have an idea of, someone like Vincent because we played and seen things like Dirge of Cerberus. So that's a blueprint kind of to pull from. We know Vincent's gonna be super agile and flashy. How they incorporate the limit breaks and monster stuff, we don't know yet, but Cid, the only kind of Dragoon we've seen so far is Sonon in the Intermission DLC, and he's not going to be like a one-to-one recreation of Sonon, but I would assume some of the things that Sonon could do, we will see Cid do since they are both Dragoon type characters. But once this full chapter comes out, I'm really excited to see it. I might try to cover it here on the channel if we can, because again, we'll see way more of Cid in action, what his battle stance is going to be, some of his abilities and weapons, which is really exciting because Part 3 is still a ways away, and it's going to be a while before we actually get to see characters like Cid and Vincent in action in that remake trilogy. But so far, he looks really awesome. Now, in terms of more previews, we also had a New Year's event for Ever Crisis that takes place in Wutai. And again, I kind of feel like this gives us an idea of what Wutai might look like in 7 Remake Part 3. Again, based on what we know from people like Nomura and some of the other devs, Wutai in Part 3 is going to be massive, not just in terms of the story, but in terms of the location itself. They're saying this is going to be a massive, massive location, which makes sense. It's an entire country, so it needs to be big. And we do get to see some of that art style, some of the bridges, some of the iconic like red wood. It's going to be exciting, but I honestly think that a good preview of what Wutai might actually end up looking like was Gilgamesh Island in Rebirth. Sections of Gilgamesh Island just kind of had that Wutai vibe to them, specifically when you first enter the island and you make your way to the front door before you're confronted by Gilgamesh. And I think that that's probably a really good idea of what Wutai, or at least sections of Wutai, might end up looking like. And then of course we still have like the mountainscape of Wutai that we're going to eventually climb up, probably encounter the Turks, which I think is going to be super fun. Cannot wait for. So Ever Crisis is really going to be the game to kind of watch this next year moving forward because of how they integrate the original FF7 stuff, but also the First Soldier. They're doing some really great stuff with Sephiroth in the First Soldier, giving us some lore on the character, even things like Masamune, which some people think might be unnecessary, but I think all in all, at the end of the day, I think the way that this supplemental material for Sephiroth in Ever Crisis is going to work, the backstory stuff, is just that, supplemental. So if you want it, it's there, but I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on the overall story and character of Sephiroth in the remake trilogy, in Part 3 in particular. And if there is anything important from Ever Crisis that needs to be in the trilogy, they'll pluck it from Ever Crisis, put it in the remake trilogy, and then explain kind of like the Spark Notes version of what you need to know about Sephiroth, about the younger version of him, maybe Masamune if they want to, just to kind of flesh out the character and move the story forward in Part 3. But again, I think most of this stuff will be supplemental. So if you want it, it's there. If you don't want it. Don't take it. And very quickly to end the video, I wanted to mention a game that I played a ton of. If you actually go back on my channel and look at some of the older videos, I have tons of gameplays for this game, and that is Friday the 13th, the game. And the reason I brought that up is because on December 31st of last year, the game ended. The servers were shut down, support was completely removed, you cannot play. that game online anymore, and a lot of that is because of the lawsuit that happened with the Friday the 13th franchise, which caused the game essentially to lose support. So no more new content, no new maps, no Jasons, nothing like that. And I had a real love-hate relationship with this game because when it worked, it really was a lot of fun. The problem is that 7 out of 10 times the game just didn't work. It was super buggy, broken, it was severely mishandled by the publisher Gun Media as well as the developers IllFonic. I just don't think they were the right team to make that game. They didn't have the proper experience to make a big asymmetrical horror game like Friday the 13th. And then Gun Media also completely mishandled that game and some of the DLC and how they, really kind of prioritize specific things about that game. I think they just did a really poor job. I do praise them for the detail they put into the game, all of the different Jasons, getting those details correct, recreating maps from the movie, which was really well done, kills from the movie was really well done, but it was just something that could have been super great but never really ran smoothly. Whenever there was bugs, they would issue hot fixes, but those hot fixes would make the game worse, and then they would release updates to fix the hot fixes, and those updates would make the game worse, and it was just a really big mess. But again, when it worked, it was super fun. I played so much of that game, put so much time into it, and I just wanted to kind of shout it out here on the channel. And maybe I'll put together a playlist of all of my Friday the 13th gameplay videos that you guys can check out, since the game is now officially dead, in case you want to revisit that world for a little bit. But with that being said, that is the video. I am Curious Corduroy. I know this video again was something different, not specifically Final Fantasy focused, but that's what I used to do a lot of back in the day before we got a lot of consistent information on Final Fantasy 16 or 7 Rebirth, and that's what I will probably do moving forward, just kind of covering a lot of the gaming stuff that interests me. I know a lot of people come to this channel specifically for Final Fantasy, so I don't expect those videos or this video even to do well, but I love being able to talk about everything so I don't burn myself out on one specific topic. But if you did make it to the end of the video, let me know in the comments down below, what did you guys think of what we covered today? Are you excited about Virtua Fighter? Have you ever played Virtua Fighter before? What are you hoping to see from the next Resident Evil? And what do you guys think so far of the teases they've given us of Sid and Rocket Town for Ever Crisis? I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.